Nurse was taking care of a woman in a vegetative state, but one day, when no one was watching, she approached the woman. And what happened next made everyone cry. The ICU environment was wrapped in a heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic sound of life monitors that kept the patients in a state between life and death. Olivia, a 25-year-old nurse recently hired by the hospital, felt the weight of that environment from her first day assigned to work there. Although she was used to dealing with severe cases, the ICU presented a different emotional challenge, a place where the line between hope and despair was almost imperceptible. Early in her shift, Olivia was assigned to care for Victoria, a 60-year-old patient who had been in a vegetative state for 3 years. Victoria lay there inert, with her eyes closed and her hands resting by her sides as if trapped in a sleep she could not wake up from. Victoria's medical record told a sad story. A violent car accident not only left her in a vegetative state, but also claimed the life of her husband, Alfred. With the empathy and dedication that had always guided her career, Olivia felt a deep desire to care for Victoria in the best way possible. Although Victoria could not express pain, joy, or any emotion, Olivia made it a point to speak to her during procedures as if her words could somehow reach her in that distant place where her mind was imprisoned. One day, during one of her shifts, as Olivia was checking Victoria's vital signs, she noticed a young man standing at the door of the ICU. He seemed lost in thought, his eyes fixed on the still figure of his mother. When their gazes met, the man entered, revealing a face marked by fatigue and sadness. He introduced himself as Henry, Victoria's son. Henry, at 27, carried a deep sadness in his eyes. The pain of losing his father and seeing his mother trapped in a vegetative state had eroded his hope over the years. However, seeing Olivia's dedication to caring for his mother, he felt something different, as if a new spark of hope had been ignited in his heart. He had never seen Olivia in the ICU before, and curious, asked if she was new to the hospital. Olivia, with a gentle smile, confirmed that she had recently started working at the hospital and had been assigned to the ICU shortly thereafter. She mentioned that she was committed to providing the best possible care for all patients, including Victoria. The way she spoke with care and respect about his mother deeply touched Henry, who was used to seeing people treat his mother as a lost cause. Intrigued, Henry began to share his mother's story with Olivia. He recounted how on that fateful day, Victoria and Alfred had gone on a short trip, something they often did to disconnect from the stressful routine of the city. However, what should have been a relaxing getaway turned into a nightmare when their car was hit by a speeding truck. Alfred did not survive the impact, and although Victoria did, she remained trapped in that state between life and death. As Henry told the story, Olivia felt a deep respect for the strong woman now under her care. She also felt a growing connection with Henry, whose pain seemed as palpable as the cold breeze that passed through the hospital corridors. It was as if somehow their lives were destined to cross at this difficult moment. In the days that followed, Olivia and Henry often found themselves meeting in the ICU. He came to visit his mother every day, and Olivia was always there, dedicated to her work, especially in caring for Victoria. The friendship between the two began to flourish based on mutual empathy and a shared desire to see Victoria improve, even if the chances were slim. At the end of that first meeting, as Henry prepared to leave, Olivia looked at Victoria and with a voice full of determination said to Henry, "As long as I'm here, I will do everything I can to take care of your mother, no matter how long it takes or what it requires." Touched by those words, Henry felt that for the first time in a long time, he was not alone in this fight, and so the fates of Olivia, Henry, and Victoria began to intertwine, giving rise to a story filled with challenges, mysteries, and above all, hope. Days in the ICU passed in an almost monotonous rhythm, with the constant sound of monitors and the meticulous movement of healthcare professionals caring for the patients. Olivia, however, never let this routine make her complacent. She kept a close watch on all her patients, especially Victoria, whose tragic story and growing bond with Henry made her pay even more attention to the small details. One quiet morning, while checking Victoria's vital signs, Olivia noticed something unexpected. While adjusting the position of the patient's hands, she noticed a slight tremor in Victoria's fingers. It was an almost imperceptible movement, something that could easily go unnoticed. Olivia froze for a moment, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks on her. She waited, watching carefully, and saw the tremor again, this time with a bit more certainty. Olivia's heart raced. She knew that in a deep, vegetative state like Victoria's, spontaneous movements were extremely rare, especially after so many years of inactivity. Could this be a sign of recovery, or was something else happening? The possibilities swirled in her mind, and she decided that this was not the kind of thing that should be ignored. In the following days, Olivia continued to closely observe Victoria. The small movements in her fingers happened at specific times, almost as if they followed a pattern. Intrigued and concerned, Olivia began documenting these events, noting the exact time and circumstances in which they occurred. With each new entry, her unease grew. These signs could be the key to understanding what was really happening with Victoria. One afternoon, when Henry arrived for his daily visit, Olivia decided it was time to share her observations. After greeting him and asking about his day, she called him aside for a more private conversation, away from the other patients and nurses. "Henry, I need to talk to you about something important," Olivia said with a serious expression. Henry felt a pang of worry in his stomach. He had become accustomed to bad news when it came to his mother, but Olivia's expression indicated that she was about to reveal something different. "What happened, Olivia?" he asked, trying to hide his nervousness. "In the past few days, I've noticed some movements in your mother's hands. Small but consistent," she began, watching Henry's reaction. "This is not common in patients in such a severe vegetative state, especially after 3 years. I've been documenting these movements, and they seem to follow a pattern." Henry was speechless for a few moments. He looked at Olivia, trying to process what she had said. Movements. After so long. His heart began to beat faster, torn between hope and the fear of being disappointed. "Are you sure, Olivia?" he asked, his voice slightly trembling. "I wouldn't say this if I wasn't sure, Henry, but I need to be honest with you. These signs are strange. They are not normal for someone in your mother's condition. Something isn't right, and that worries me," Olivia replied, her voice firm but gentle. Henry felt a mix of emotions. On the one hand, he wanted to believe that his mother was somehow beginning to recover. On the other hand, Olivia's words sparked a flame of suspicion. He knew that something like this couldn't just be a coincidence, and Olivia's concern only reinforced that feeling. "What do you think might be happening?" Henry asked, trying to stay calm. Olivia hesitated for a moment before answering, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not a doctor, but the behavior of these movements is peculiar. It might be that your mother's diagnosis or treatment needs to be reviewed. Perhaps some detail has been overlooked. I believe we should investigate this more thoroughly." Olivia's words fell like a bombshell on Henry. The possibility that something might be wrong with his mother's treatment put him on high alert. He couldn't help but think that perhaps something was being covered up, or that a serious mistake had been made. The doubt began to take root in his mind, and he knew he couldn't rest until he discovered the truth. "Olivia, you're right. We need to investigate this. I can't ignore these signs. I'll think about how we can do this as carefully as possible," Henry said, determined. Olivia nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility grow. She knew she was entering dangerous territory, but she couldn't let a possible injustice go unnoticed. Victoria deserved more than that. The unease that lingered over Henry since the conversation with Olivia gave him no rest. Each time he saw his mother, the doubt grew. Fueled by the small movements, he now began to notice himself. There was no longer any way to ignore what was happening. Victoria, who had remained motionless for so long, was beginning to show signs of life, but this brought more questions than answers. Determined that he could no longer remain at the mercy of uncertainty, Henry decided to investigate what was happening with his mother's treatment. The story told by Olivia was enough to make him question the intentions and practices of Dr. Robert, the doctor responsible for Victoria since the accident. Henry knew he needed professional help to deal with this delicate situation, so he decided to seek out Detective Samuel. Samuel was a middle-aged man known for his discretion and ability to unravel mysteries that seemed impossible to solve. With a solid career and an impressive track record of solved cases, he had become the natural choice for Henry. When the detective heard Henry's account of Victoria's movements and the suspicions raised by Olivia, he accepted the case without hesitation. Something was strange in the story, and Samuel was determined to find out what it was. "We need to start by gathering as much information as possible about Dr. Robert," Samuel said in a serious tone. "If there's something wrong with your mother's treatment, he must be at the center of it. I'll begin investigating his background, finances, and anything else that might give us a clue about what's going on." Henry agreed, feeling relieved to finally be taking action. However, he knew he would need to keep everything secret to avoid any repercussions. He told Olivia about his decision to hire Samuel and asked her to continue observing any changes in his mother's condition. If something was wrong, the signs would certainly reappear. Olivia, already attentive to every detail, intensified her vigilance. She meticulously noted every movement, every small sign that Victoria gave. It was during this observation that she noticed a disturbing pattern. Victoria's hand movements always occurred at specific times, almost as if they were induced. This reinforced her suspicions that something was interfering with Victoria's natural state, possibly some kind of medication. Without wasting time, Olivia shared this discovery with Henry, who immediately passed it on to Samuel. The detective, already aware that he was dealing with something much larger than simple medical negligence, began investigating Dr. Robert's routine more rigorously. He started monitoring the doctor's work hours, the people he met with, and even his financial records, looking for any sign of suspicious behavior. Meanwhile, the tension at the hospital grew. Henry and Olivia found themselves increasingly involved in the investigation, but needed to act with extreme caution to avoid raising suspicion. The connection between them strengthened, united by the common goal of protecting Victoria and uncovering the truth behind the unexplained movements. Samuel, in turn, began uncovering a series of irregularities in Dr. Robert's records. Strange financial transactions surfaced, exorbitant amounts that didn't make sense for a doctor in his position. Moreover, there were reports of other patients in less severe conditions who also showed signs of recovery at specific times, only to inexplicably regress afterward. These coincidences raised even more suspicion. The investigation, which initially seemed to be solely about Victoria's health, began to expand, revealing a possible larger scheme involving Dr. Robert. Samuel was increasingly convinced that the doctor was involved in something dark and that Victoria might be just one of the victims in a much more complex plan. Henry, although eager to know the truth, began to feel the weight of the situation. What initially seemed like hope for his mother's recovery now seemed to be turning into a nightmare. However, he knew he couldn't give up. Alongside Olivia and with Samuel's help, he was determined to see this through, no matter the consequences. Time passed slowly for Henry and Olivia as they anxiously awaited news from Detective Samuel. With each visit to the ICU, Henry felt the weight of doubt grow, while Victoria remained in that state between life and death. The small movements that once brought hope now seemed to be harbingers of something much more sinister. After weeks of investigation, Samuel finally called Henry for a meeting at his office. The detective, usually calm and meticulous, was visibly tense when Henry arrived. The tension in the air was palpable, and Henry knew that what was to come would not be easy to hear. "Henry, I've gathered information that completely changes the course of this investigation," Samuel began, gesturing for Henry to sit. "What I've discovered not only confirms our suspicions, but also reveals a web of corruption much deeper than we imagined." Henry, with his heart racing, remained silent, waiting for Samuel to continue. "Dr. Robert is involved in highly suspicious financial activities," Samuel continued, opening a file filled with documents. "There are large sums of money moving through his bank accounts, and these transactions coincide with the costs of your mother's treatment." The revelation hit like a bombshell. Henry couldn't believe what he was hearing. The sums were exorbitant, far beyond what a doctor should be handling. And the fact that these amounts coincided with what Victoria's family was paying the hospital couldn't be a mere coincidence. "But why?" Henry asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Why would he do something like this?" Samuel closed the file and looked Henry in the eye, his face serious. "We don't know all the details yet, but what we can deduce is that Dr. Robert is financially benefiting from your mother's condition. He might be manipulating the medical records, keeping Victoria in this vegetative state to continue receiving payments. It's possible that he's diverting that money into his personal accounts." Henry felt a wave of anger and despair rise within him. The thought that someone was deliberately preventing his mother's recovery for money was unbearable. His mind raced, trying to process what Samuel had just revealed. "That's monstrous," Henry muttered, almost to himself. "Yes, it is," Samuel agreed, his expression grim. "And that's why we need to be very careful moving forward. If we confront Dr. Robert without irrefutable proof he could escape and continue his activities, we need more evidence, something that can incriminate him definitively." Henry nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. He knew he needed to do something. He couldn't just wait for the situation to resolve itself. He remembered Olivia's observations about his mother's movements, which always happened at the same times. That could be a crucial clue. That same night, Henry met with Olivia to discuss Samuel's findings. They gathered in a discreet cafe, away from the curious eyes of their hospital colleagues. "Olivia, Samuel confirmed our suspicions. Dr. Robert is embezzling money, and worst of all, it seems he's keeping my mother in this state on purpose to keep profiting," Henry said, his voice heavy with frustration. Olivia remained silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the situation. "That explains why your mother's movements always happen at the same times," she finally responded. "There must be something he's doing, some medication he administers at those specific times to keep your mother in that state. We need to find out what it is and how he's doing it." Henry looked at Olivia, admiring her determination. She was as committed as he was to uncovering the truth and saving his mother. "We need more concrete evidence," Henry said, already formulating a plan. "Samuel suggested that we need something to definitively incriminate Dr. Robert. Maybe if we can capture one of those moments when he administers the medication, we'll have what we need." Olivia nodded, knowing that this would be a risky but necessary task. They would need to act with precision, without raising suspicion, to catch Robert in the act. Time was of the essence, and with each passing day, Victoria's life was at risk. "Let's do this, Henry," Olivia said, holding his hand for a brief moment. "I'm with you, whatever you need." That night marked the beginning of a new phase in the investigation. With Samuel's discoveries and Henry and Olivia's determination, they were ready to expose Dr. Robert and end his corrupt scheme. But they knew the path ahead would be dangerous and full of uncertainties. The atmosphere in the hospital was denser than ever, with Henry and Olivia aware that every move they made could be crucial to the investigation's outcome. After Samuel's discoveries, the urgency to obtain evidence against Dr. Robert became the top priority. Henry knew he couldn't do it alone, and Olivia, with her access to the ICU and proximity to Victoria, would be his most valuable ally. They decided to act quickly. The first step would be to install hidden cameras and microphones in Victoria's room to capture any suspicious activity. With Samuel's help, they obtained the necessary equipment, small devices that could easily be hidden without raising suspicion. The tension increased with each step, but their determination was greater. On a particularly quiet night, when the hospital corridors were almost empty and the staff was reduced, Henry and Olivia met in the ICU. The plan was simple, but risky. Install the devices in strategic locations in Victoria's room without anyone noticing. Every second counted, and every move had to be perfect. Olivia, with her skillful hands and familiarity with the environment, began working quickly. She chose locations where the cameras could capture a wide view of the room, especially the area around Victoria's bed and the room's entrance. The microphones were hidden in corners where they would pick up any sound, no matter how subtle. Henry, though nervous, tried to remain calm while helping Olivia adjust the devices. Every click of the camera as it was fixed in place made his heart race. But he knew this was a crucial step. The idea of spying on his own hospital made him uncomfortable. But the thought that it could save his mother motivated him to continue. Once everything was in place, Olivia made one last check to ensure the devices were well hidden and functioning properly. She looked at Henry, who nodded silently. Both knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. Now all they could do was wait. The following nights were tense. Henry and Olivia eagerly awaited the recordings, reviewing the footage and audio whenever they could, hoping to find something that would incriminate Dr. Robert. Time seemed to pass more slowly as they analyzed every detail, every sound, in search of a clue. However, as they waited for the evidence that would condemn Robert, Olivia began to feel the weight of her actions. The long hours spent in the ICU, observing every movement of her colleagues, began to wear down her trust in those around her. She had always believed that the healthcare professionals beside her shared the same commitment to life and ethics, but the possibility that one of them was involved in something so dark made her question that belief. Olivia found herself watching the doctors and nurses with more suspicion than ever. She began to doubt gestures she once considered routine and wondered if any of them knew what was happening with Victoria. The idea that the hospital, a place of healing and hope, could be harboring corrupt and criminal activities deeply disturbed her. Meanwhile, Henry also struggled with his own emotions. He felt a mix of fear and anger every time he thought about what they might discover. What if the devices didn't capture anything? What if Dr. Robert was being too careful? Or worse, what if the recordings revealed something Henry wasn't prepared to face? The tension between the two began to grow as the days passed without major revelations. Olivia, always confident in her work, began to question whether she was doing the right thing. She was risking her career and her ethics, all for a truth that was still hidden in the shadows. She wondered if the cost of discovering this truth would be too high. Finally, after days of anxious waiting, one night brought something unexpected. As Henry and Olivia reviewed the recordings, they noticed something strange. Dr. Robert had entered Victoria's room at an unusual time, outside his usual routine of visits. He was not accompanied by any other medical staff, and his behavior seemed more cautious, as if he knew he needed to be discreet. Olivia and Henry watched with bated breath as Robert approached Victoria's bed. He pulled a small vial from his pocket and, with a furtive glance towards the door, administered the contents into Victoria's vein. The camera captured his muffled words, but enough to understand. "Just a few more days, just a few more days, and everything will be mine." The phrase echoed in Henry's mind like a devastating blow. Everything he feared was happening before his eyes. Olivia beside him was motionless, shock and indignation mixing on her face. This was the proof they needed, but it was also the confirmation of something terrible. Victoria was being deliberately kept in a state of semi-consciousness, all in the name of a personal corruption scheme. With the evidence in hand, Henry and Olivia knew they couldn't waste any more time. They needed to act quickly but cautiously. They were aware that Dr. Robert might realize he was being watched and try to escape or worsen Victoria's condition. The decision was clear. They would take the evidence to Samuel immediately and then involve the authorities to ensure Robert was detained before he could cause more harm. What began as a suspicion had turned into a real nightmare, and now, more than ever, they needed to protect Victoria and ensure justice was served. With renewed determination, Henry grabbed his phone and called Samuel, explaining in a low, controlled voice what they had discovered. Samuel, who had been waiting for news, responded immediately. "Henry, bring that evidence to my office right now. We need to act fast," Samuel said, the urgency evident in his voice. "I'll contact the police. They need to see this with their own eyes." Without wasting time, Henry and Olivia headed to Samuel's office, protecting the recordings as if they were Victoria's very life. During the short drive, the silence between them was heavy. Henry focused on staying calm, but his mind kept replaying Robert's words, the casual and cold tone with which he spoke about keeping his mother sedated just for greed. When they arrived at Samuel's office, they were immediately ushered in. The detective, upon reviewing the recordings, was equally shocked, though his face remained impassive, trained to hide emotions in critical situations. After watching the irrefutable evidence, Samuel leaned back in his chair and looked at Henry and Olivia with a serious expression. "This is enough to arrest Robert red-handed," he said, his voice grave. "We can't waste any more time. The police need to see this now, and we need to act before Robert realizes we're onto him." Henry nodded, his face a mask of determination. Olivia beside him nodded as well, though she was still clearly shaken by what they had witnessed. "And what about my mother?" Henry asked, his voice nearly breaking as he spoke the words. "We need to ensure she's safe." Samuel nodded, understanding Henry's concern. "The police will intervene immediately. Once Robert is arrested, your mother will be safe. Moreover, we'll need a new medical evaluation to ensure she receives proper treatment without Robert's interference," he said, already picking up the phone to make the initial contacts. As Samuel coordinated with the police, Henry and Olivia prepared for the storm that was about to break. What was at stake was much more than just Victoria's safety. They were about to expose a scheme that could have affected other lives, perhaps even other patients in the hospital. Shortly after, the police arrived at Samuel's office, and the evidence was handed over to the officers. The recordings were reviewed again, this time by trained eyes looking for any signs that could be contested in court. When they finished, there was no doubt. Dr. Robert would be arrested. The early morning was cold and silent when the police operation was launched. The hospital corridors, usually filled with the constant sounds of monitors and hurried footsteps, were now filled with a different kind of tension. The police team, led by Samuel, entered the building with precision and discretion, aware of the gravity of the situation. The objective was clear: arrest Dr. Robert before he had any chance to react or, worse, escape. Henry and Olivia waited anxiously outside, their hearts racing. Although they knew the police were in control, the fear that something might go wrong didn't leave them. The image of Victoria, fragile and vulnerable, never left their minds. Inside the hospital, Dr. Robert carried out his routine like any other day, unaware that his nefarious actions were about to be exposed. He didn't suspect that the hospital walls, which had protected him for so long, now hid those who watched and waited for the right moment to act. As soon as Robert entered Victoria's room, the police made their move. The door was abruptly opened, and Robert barely had time to react before being surrounded by armed officers. Surprised and confused, he was quickly handcuffed. The shocked look on his face showed that he had never anticipated such an outcome for his meticulously crafted plan. "Dr. Robert, you're under arrest on suspicion of corruption, fraud, and attempted homicide," one of the officers announced, his voice firm and without hesitation. The news of Robert's arrest spread through the hospital like wildfire. Employees, patients, and visitors watched in astonishment as the once respected doctor was taken into police custody. It was the beginning of a scandal that would shake the very foundations of that institution. In the interrogation that followed, Robert, initially resistant, soon realized he was cornered. The evidence was overwhelming, and the pressure to confess became unbearable. Under the cold light of the interrogation room, with Samuel and other officers watching him closely, Robert began to talk. "I kept Victoria sedated to divert the hospital's money," he admitted, his voice a mix of anger and defeat. "I knew no one would question the treatment of a woman who had been in a vegetative state for so long. The money her family paid for her treatment, I redirected it to my personal accounts. It was easy. No one ever suspected." The confession was a gut punch for those who heard it. Robert detailed how, over the years, he diverted millions, enriching himself at the expense of others' suffering. Not only did he manipulate Victoria's condition, but he also kept other patients in similar situations, ensuring that the illicit money flow never ceased. "Why?" Samuel asked, trying to understand what would drive a doctor to commit such atrocities. Robert merely shrugged, a bitter smile on his face. "Because I could, because the system allows it, and I took advantage." These words, spoken with such coldness, were enough to ensure that Robert would be seen as the villain he truly was. The scandal took on gigantic proportions, and soon the entire media was reporting on the case. The hospital, which had once prided itself on its impeccable reputation, now found itself at the center of a deep investigation, with several other practices being called into question. Meanwhile, Henry and Olivia, who had been kept informed by Samuel, were finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Robert's arrest meant that Victoria was safe. More than that, it meant that the nightmare that had lasted 3 years was finally coming to an end. The darkness that had enveloped their lives began to dissipate, and a new light emerged on the horizon. "We did it, Olivia," Henry said, his voice choked with emotion. He embraced Olivia, who was equally emotional. The relief mixed with gratitude was almost palpable. "Yes, Henry, now we can give your mother a real chance to recover," Olivia responded, tears in her eyes. In the days that followed, Victoria began to show clearer and more consistent signs of improvement. Without Robert's interference, her body slowly began to respond to the proper treatment. The doctors, now under intense supervision, were cautiously optimistic. Henry spent more and more time by his mother's side, holding her hands and telling her stories, hoping that somewhere inside her she could hear him. For Olivia, the whole experience was transformative. Although the road had been difficult and full of uncertainties, she felt that she had fulfilled her duty to the best of her ability. However, what surprised her most was the bond that had formed between her and Henry. The friendship and partnership that were born amid adversity now seemed to have the potential to blossom into something more. As the hospital dealt with the consequences of the scandal, Olivia and Henry knew that although the battle was not yet completely won, they had taken a big step toward justice and Victoria's recovery. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The days following Dr. Roberts' arrest brought a renewed sense of hope to Henry and Olivia. With the villain out of the way, the atmosphere in the hospital began to change, and the energy around Victoria seemed different, lighter, almost as if an invisible weight had been lifted. Weeks after the arrest, Victoria began showing significant signs of improvement. The doctors, now attentive and committed to providing the best care, adjusted her medications and started a new care protocol. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Victoria, who had been trapped in a deep vegetative state, began to respond to the stimuli around her. It all started subtly. Small head movements, eyes that had always been closed, now blinked slowly as if waking from a long sleep. But the most remarkable moment was one morning when Henry entered the room and saw his mother trying to hold the spoon the nurse was holding. "Mom," Henry whispered, barely believing what he was seeing. With effort, Victoria brought the spoon to her mouth, a simple gesture that carried deep meaning. She was beginning to feed herself, something Henry had feared he would never see again. Tears streamed down Henry's face as he watched the scene, his heart full of an emotion he had long forgotten: joy. In the following days, Victoria continued to improve. Every small advance was celebrated as a major victory. She began to move her hands with more control, open her eyes, and focus on Henry's face, as if finally recognizing the presence of the son who had never abandoned her. The progress was slow, but steady. Olivia, who continued to work closely with the medical team, felt deeply gratified to see the results. She knew there was still a long way to go, but each small step Victoria took was a testament to the strength that still existed within her. "Olivia, I have no words to thank you for everything you've done," Henry said one day as they watched Victoria resting after a physical therapy session. "You saved my mother's life." "You too, Henry. We did this together," Olivia replied, smiling. The bond between them, forged in adversity, was now strengthening in hope and joy. With Victoria out of immediate danger, both began to look to the future with more optimism, certain that despite the challenges that might still arise, the worst was behind them. Victoria was regaining her life, and with it, Henry and Olivia began to see a new beginning, where the pain of the past began to give way to a future full of possibilities. The moment Henry had been waiting for finally arrived. Victoria was being transferred from the ICU to a regular room. The move, though simple, symbolized a huge leap in his mother's recovery. Henry's face lit up with hope and relief as he watched her being moved to a more welcoming space, away from the equipment that once monitored every beat of her heart. In the new room, Victoria continued to surprise everyone. Her progress, which had started with small gestures, now included short conversations and smiles that filled Henry with indescribable happiness. Each day, she seemed stronger, more present, and this renewed the strength of everyone around her. As a gesture of gratitude and affection, Henry decided to invite Olivia to visit his mother during her day off. He wanted Victoria to know how important Olivia had been in her recovery. When he extended the invitation, Olivia accepted enthusiastically, feeling honored to share this special moment with them. On the day of the visit, Olivia arrived at the hospital with a radiant smile. Upon entering the room, she was greeted by Victoria with a warm look, and Henry, beside the bed, looked happier than ever. "Mom, this is Olivia," Henry began, holding his mother's hand tenderly. "She was crucial in helping you get to where you are today, getting better every day." Victoria, her voice still a little weak but full of emotion, thanked Olivia sincerely. "Thank you for everything. I feel that I'm alive, thanks to you and Henry." Olivia, touched by Victoria's words, responded humbly, feeling a deep connection with the family that had become so dear to her. As they talked and laughed together, the room's atmosphere was light and full of hope. After a while, as Victoria rested, Henry and Olivia went out for coffee. The conversation between them flowed naturally, and both began to realize that something deeper was developing between them. The bond they had started to build amidst chaos was now blossoming into something more, something they were both ready to explore. "Olivia, I don't know what the future holds, but I'd like to see where this connection could lead us," Henry said, looking into her eyes. Olivia smiled, feeling the same. "I would too, Henry. I think we deserve this chance to find happiness after everything we've been through." The day Henry had been waiting for finally arrived. After months of struggle and recovery, Victoria was ready to leave the hospital. Though her recovery was still ongoing, the transformation she had undergone was nothing short of miraculous. As she walked out the hospital door, supported by Henry and Olivia, the fresh air outside seemed to symbolize the new beginning awaiting her. Victoria, still a little frail but with a sparkle in her eyes that Henry hadn't seen in a long time, looked up at the sky and took a deep breath. Every step she took was a triumph, not just against the physical condition that had kept her bedridden, but also against the dark forces that had nearly stolen her life. Beside her, Henry and Olivia were ready to help her rebuild her life. The house, which once seemed full of painful memories, now became a place of healing and hope. With the help of Henry and Olivia, Victoria began to rediscover small joys: a book she loved to read, the sound of music she hadn't heard in years, and even the pleasure of a homemade meal prepared with love. Each day was a small victory, a new opportunity to live. Henry and Olivia, for their part, grew closer and closer. The experience they shared had united them in ways neither could have predicted. The mutual support and affection they developed were evident in every gesture, in every look. It wasn't long before Henry, knowing he had found the love of his life, decided to take the next step. On a sunny afternoon during a walk they took together, Henry knelt before Olivia, his eyes filled with love and hope. "Olivia, you came into my life in a moment of pain and darkness and brought light and hope. I can't imagine a future without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Olivia, emotional, could barely hold back her tears as she smiled and said yes. It was the beginning of a new journey, not just for them, but for the whole family they were forming together. The wedding was a simple but meaningful celebration. Victoria, still in recovery, insisted on being present, sitting in the front row with a smile that reflected the joy she felt seeing her son and Olivia finding happiness together. Over time, Victoria's life continued to improve. Though she still used a wheelchair on some occasions, she was more alive and present than ever. Henry and Olivia cared for her with love, and together, the three of them began to plan a future full of possibilities. Meanwhile, Robert, the man whose greed nearly destroyed so many lives, was in prison paying for his crimes. Within the cold walls of his cell, he was finally forced to confront the evil he had caused. Without the wealth and power that once protected him, he spent his days reflecting on the choices that led him there, haunted by the lives he had destroyed. For Henry, Olivia, and Victoria, the painful past was now behind them. What remained was the present and the future they were building together. With love, hope, and a new understanding of what truly mattered, they embraced the new life that lay ahead of them, ready to start over and live each day to the fullest. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.